The Peckarye's invasion was going well. Narrate was a small planet with big potential. Located right next to a major warp gate, it gave anyone who controlled it full power over one of the most important trade routes connecting the surrounding systems. Galactic powers like the Orion Trade Union or the Blue Band use this gate on an almost daily basis to move their trade ships across the galaxy, and countless minor factions like the Tshirt or the Humans were even more reliant on it. Controlling this warp gate would significantly boost the Peckarye's influence and power. Right now, the warp gate of Nikila Free belonged to the Akri, but that would change soon. The only reason why the Akri hadn't been fully crushed yet was because the Peckarye required the planet intact, forcing them to rely on less destructive weaponry. But in the end, the Akri resistance still fell one by one, be it somewhat slower than if they were to use their full might. Peckarye Commander Twix watched the capital city from the safety of her command ship, currently hovering in the atmosphere within visual range of the capital, but outside of the active combat zone. As an avian species, they prided themselves on their aviation technology, and almost every ship could fluidly transition from space to atmospheric flight and back. Their ships were some of the best in the galaxy, and nearly impossible to shoot down. It was due to this that she watched with disdain as their fighters struggled to penetrate the air defenses around the capital. "Why has our offensive slowed down?" Twix demanded to know. "Every other city until now folded like wet towels. Why isn't the same happening to the capital?" Her subordinates exchanged nervous glances, but eventually one of them spoke up from behind his monitor. "They're using a different type of air defense, Commander. Unlike the other cities, they aren't using Akri flak guns, but the newest generation SAM turrets. Our scanners suggest human design, and both decoys and flares struggle to shake them off. We lost multiple fighters already and can't get close enough for precision strikes." Commander Twix frowned, clacking her beak. "Human? Excellent marksman, but extremely fragile. I remember fighting them before. Are they trading with the Akri?" She had always respected the humans, to some degree. Sure, they were nowhere near as mighty as the Peckarye, but they knew how to fight. The fact that they made deals with the Akri, however, made her lose a good chunk of that respect. Any species that knew their worth didn't trade with the lesser. Trading one of your most powerful technologies for those uncivilized, useless power armor? How disgraceful. Affirmative. They have an alliance, and the Akri traded multiple sets of their famous power armor, custom redesigned to fit human biology, in exchange for these turrets. Even the blueprints were exchanged. "I'm not interested in economics. Tell me about these turrets. How do we take them out?" Twix snapped, glaring at the Peckarye in question. He flinched, quickly pulling up some documents on his monitor. "Humans are pioneers in ranged combat technology. I'm sorry, Commander, but taking those turrets out from a distance is nearly impossible. They outrange our guns and can shoot down any missiles. Our only options are a ground offensive or bombing them." Commander Twix didn't reply. From her previous experience with human technology, she had feared this would be the case. It could be worse, however. There were no humans present, and the Akri would be nowhere near as efficient with these weapons. "Bombing is not an option. We need that city intact. Get the ground troops ready." This was a suboptimal condition. The Akri fought quite differently from the Peckarye, and their army was heavily landbound. Rather than relying on elegant weapons, they used their natural ones. Not even blades expanded their arsenal. Instead, they used exosuits, aka power armor, as they called it, to enhance their natural abilities to better rip their enemies apart with teeth and claws. Trix scoffed. Pathetic beasts. She was surprised these ferals had even managed to reach the stars. The Peckarye were a lot more civilized. The warp gate would be in much more capable talons with them compared to the previous owners. Landing the flagship outside of the capital, about 5,000 ground troops were deployed, as well as about 500 hover tanks. They had evolved past primitive technologies like wheels or tracks, and armor was now partly airborne, another testament to the Peckarye's superiority. They would be splitting into 5 groups and attacking from all sides. The SAM turrets were positioned more towards the outside of the capital, not too far behind the city walls. Taking them out would be a cakewalk. The walls had proven no barrier for their hover tanks, which could simply float over them, and the infantry had even fewer problems, as Peckarye could naturally fly. The Akri had obviously tried to stop them, but Trix had ensured they would have the numerical advantage. While the Akri were strong in ground combat, they were heavily outnumbered, and even their barbaric tactics couldn't help them anymore. Trix scoffed in disbelief as she inspected the corpse of a fellow Peckarye. Their throat and belly had been cleanly sliced open by sharp claws, ending their lives in seconds. Akri were monsters if they enjoyed killing their enemies in such bloody ways. They even looked a lot more like bloodthirsty predators rather than a civilized species. A mouthful of fangs and claws on their hands and feet, nobody would blame you for mistaking an Akri for some dinosaur. Nevertheless, they were doing well. The Akri had barely managed to kill a handful of them, unable to get close enough to land these killing blows. The Peckarye simply had the more advanced weapons, the newest generation arc throwers, lethal weapons that fire streams of pure electricity. Any Akri that got too close would spend their last few moments screaming in agony as the arc throwers send millions of volt through them. You barely needed to aim. Modern arc throwers found their target on their own, and it was a completely bloodless affair, spilling no blood. As they made their way through the streets, aiming for the last SAM turret, Trix noticed movement behind her. An Akri, in what she assumed to be a light power armor, had clamped its jaws around the back of one of its downed comrades' necks, carefully dragging them into a nearby building. The mark on their side identified them as a medic, and Trix scoffed in disgust. Grabbed like a predator dragging off a piece of meat, a Peckarye would have used a stretcher like a civilized being. Pointing her weapon, she fired, and the Akri shrieked in agony as blue arcs of electricity ran up and down their body. Their muscles forcefully contracted, and blood gushed out from between their jaws as their teeth involuntarily clamped down. The medic was still alive when she ceased firing, but had no eyes for her. Instead, they stared at their now dead patient in disbelief and shock, a desperate whine escaping their blood-covered mouth, the blood of a fellow Akri. Despair turned into pain as Trix fired again to finish them off. It took a moment. Arc throwers weren't exactly the fastest killing weapons, but it was still a lot more civilized than slicing someone's throat, and not a single drop of blood was spilled. Boom! The battlefield turned silent, and everyone looked up in surprise when a Peckarye carrier exploded into a ball of flames, the debris raining down on the battlefield below. That wasn't the only thing that came down from the heavens, however, as multiple gunships descended towards the ship below and started engaging the Peckarye fighters. Impossible! They had crushed the Akri Air Force weeks ago. How could they... Wait, those weren't Akri fighters. The silence was broken by an Akri. The humans! They have received our distress call! Another faction? A string of rather uncivilized curses escaped Trix's mouth before she could stop herself. Having a third party meddle into this conquest was the last thing they needed. They had been so close to taking the planet. Now everything was uncertain and descending into chaos. She scolded herself. She had battled humans before. She knew how to take them, what their weaknesses were. This was just a setback. Victory was still achievable. Humans might have outstanding aim, but they were wimps, having bodies that snapped like twigs under pressure. If it weren't for the lethality of their weapons, nobody would take them seriously. She grabbed her communicator and set it to transmit to all troops. Cover the high grounds and surround any potential drop-off zones. Humans are glass cannons. They die easily once you hit them. Just don't give them a chance to shoot. They hit hard. The Peckarye forces sprang into action like a well-oiled machine, adapting to the new threat. A squad of soldiers surrounded her, personal guards responsible for her protection now that things got heated. Commander, how large are humans exactly? One of the guards suddenly asked. Their pathetic size barely reaches 2 meters in height. You're supposed to know that, soldier. Commander Trix snapped back, annoyed by the distraction. If that's the case, then what in the stars is that? The distress in their tone got her attention, and she followed his gaze towards a group of dropships that had gotten past their fighters, quickly approaching the city. Those weren't the source of the soldiers' distress, however, but rather the things attached below them. Giants. Commander Trix couldn't believe her eyes when one of these giants, easily 2 to 3 times larger than what a human was supposed to be, detached from the dropship and crashed down on top of a hover tank, reducing it to scrap metal. Only as it climbed down from the wreckage, completely unharmed, did she get a better look at it, and as she started to understand what she was looking at, her uneasiness was replaced by fear. A machine. A giant exosuit had been dropped off by the dropship, and it was merely the first of many. This was impossible. Humans were wimps, fragile glass cannons. Their soldiers wore cloth uniforms with metal plates attached to them, rather than proper armor. Where in the stars did they get fully functional mechs from? She didn't get time to question it further, as the exosuit opened fire on them with the 2 Gatling guns that it had instead of arms. A few Peckarye tried to attack it with their arc throwers, but the electric arcs harmlessly fizzled along the outer plates, down the legs, being reabsorbed by the ground without hitting any vital systems or the pilot of the mech. "Hover tanks! Engage those exosuits!" Commander Trix desperately screamed into her communicator, and much to her relief, the heavily armoured vehicles obeyed without hesitation. With loud roars, a missile was sent on its way. Highly advanced self-propelled weapon systems, with a payload that could take out any armour, and a guiding system that was difficult to fool. These missiles were pinnacle of Peckarye weapon technology. Countless years, credits, and mines had been invested into them. The exosuit noticed as well and opened fire. At first she assumed it was trying to take out the tank, to pull its killer alongside itself into the grave, but when she noticed that it wasn't targeting the tank, but the missile... No, it couldn't. It wouldn't. It was the pinnacle of their technology. There was no way... Boom! Trix flinched, as the shockwave ruffled her feathers, and much to her horror, the exosuit was still standing. Millions, if not billions of credits worth of research, taken out by an overclocked chemical slug thrower. More exosuits dropped in around them, and the sky was starting to show less and less Peckarye ships. Everywhere she looked, her troops were falling, and soon enough the first hover tank went down as well. Then, just when she didn't think it could get worse, one of the exosuits turned to face her. Her wings shook in distress as she opened fire, a continuous stream of pure electricity lighting up between her and the exosuit. But it didn't stop, didn't even slow down. The arc thrower was completely useless. The exosuit, meanwhile, didn't even bother to shoot her, simply swiping at her with its arm. The side of the Gatling gun painfully hit her in the side. Something, presumably her wing, broke and her weapon was sent flying. She landed painfully on her back. She groaned, but managed to slowly right herself back up. If she was going to die, she was going to die standing, staring down her enemies rather than with her beak in the dirt. The exosuit stomped past her, surprising her and the Akri equally. "Aren't you going to finish her off?" one of the Akri soldiers asked in stunned disbelief. The machine paused and turned towards the Akri, giving Trix a chance to compare the exosuit to the Akri power armor, finding a surprising amount of similarities. Akri power armor. The human had turned the power armor of those uncivilized ferals into giant, heavily armed mechs. She started to realize that the trade deal the humans had made with the Akri was nowhere near as stupid as she thought it had been. The exosuit looked back at Commander Trix before turning away. "Nah, I want to go fight another tank. She's all yours." With those words, the human left, leaving the downed Peckarye to her doom, as the Akri closed in on her.